I'd like to thank you for joining this webinar, Turning Learning Loss into Life-Changing Gains with New Stimulus Funds. I'm Barb Smith, Chief Development Officer at American Reading Company, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Gina Zorzi-Klein, our Chief Program Officer, Glory A.C. Davis, Regional VP of Sales for the Midwest, Amelia Larson, EVP of Innovations and Academic Partnerships, and yours truly. We plan to send resources out after this webinar to help support the conversations we have today and your planning in your schools. It's hard to believe that just a year ago, the pandemic began. While there are still challenges ahead, there are bright spots on the horizon, including the new American Rescue Plan. We all want to get the maximum impact from this historic federal investment in our schools. In the next hour, I'll review the funding and how it can be used. And then our team will discuss insights from research that can inform your strategy with an eye towards moving beyond short-term recovery to build better systems for all of our students. This is a tremendous opportunity, not just to return to normal, but to build back better. Last week, President Biden signed into law the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, a $1.9 trillion bill. This is the third investment in public education since last March. This is really a once-in-a-generation investment, both in the dollar amounts and in the flexibility. As we take a look here, we can see how much Congress is spending to shore up schools. The funding falls into three buckets. The CARES Act signed into law last March, the COVID relief package, or ESSERS 2, signed in December, which provided 4 times the amount of the March bill to public schools, and now the American Rescue Plan signed into law in March 2021. Many folks are seeing funds roll out for the December bill now. So let's just take ourselves back a moment to where we were last March. In the beginning, as schools shut down, everyone sprang into action. Schools were shoring up feeding, transportation, access to technology, and looking for ways to provide access to print and digital resources to keep the learning going. So much of the first CARES package really was focused on, as my colleague Amelia says, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of really shoring up that basic level. That funding provided an emergency fund for governors and also the elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund. And that is really becoming, throughout all these three stimulus packages, it's becoming the mainstay. The great thing about that is that it's providing funding to states and then to districts through Title I Part A formula, the funding that you already know and are used to. In ESSERS 1, we saw a 10% statewide set aside for activities and administration. In many states, that was leveraged to increase access to technology and also to broadband, as well as to begin to shore up school reinstatement plans. The other thing just to note with this is the date. Although it's just a year ago, the funds are able to be obligated through September 30th, 2022. From March to December, we saw another stabilization package come along. Again, there was a GEAR fund for governors. This time, it was focused on emergency assistance to non-public schools, particularly those with students who had an economic impact. And again, through ESSERS, your Title I formula, Another 54.3 billion came through. That's 4 times the amount that was in the first package. Again, you can see the broad flexibility, the ability to use this fund as you would any Title I funding, but also to support our most vulnerable students through IDA, Perkins Career in Tech, and for students experiencing homelessness through McKinney-Venturi. The other thing you'll see here is that these funds are available to be obligated through September 30th, 2023. In addition, at this point in December, the emergency broadband benefit went into effect, which is an up to $50 a month subsidy for consumers. We get questions all the time from districts who are saying, hey, can I use my CARES funding with American Reading Company? How do I go about this? Gosh, I have shortfalls in some areas of my budget, but now I have all of this funding that I need to use in specific ways. Can you help me? Absolutely, we can help you with that. We really want to help you get the maximum impact out of this and recognize that this is a once in a generation type of funding. What you'll see here are the 7 allowable uses that we align with out of the 15 allowable uses from the CARES Act. You'll see that you can use American Reading Company solutions with your CARES Act funding across Title I to support school leaders in their own investment and also in shoring up what's happening with their faculty and making sure they have enough support. You'll also see an emphasis on supporting the unique needs of students, whether they're English language learners or students experiencing homelessness. You'll see dollars for educational technology. What we're particularly excited about is the opportunity to reimagine the school day, to think about community supports after school and summer learning, including online and in-person learning. We also know that the CARES Act will give us the opportunity to use high quality assessments to know exactly what our students need and evidence-based activities that teachers can use to support the learning. In addition, there'll be supports for families. And also funds can be used to help maintain the operation and continuity of services in schools, helping you build the infrastructure. We're looking not just for short-term wins, but the opportunity to rethink your systems for the future. Beyond the CARES and the CARES Act 2, we now have the American Rescue Plan. This was signed by Joe Biden last week and will continue to, regulations and guidance with this will continue to roll out in the coming weeks. As you saw with the earliest funding, there are opportunities to fund PPE, ventilation, the support staff that you need, but also to close the digital divide, to make up for lost learning time, and to really look at reduced class size and create and expand community schools. When we think about the funding that has occurred, what you're really talking about is an elevation of per pupil formulas of more than $4,000 per student. It's really incredible. We also know that this is short-term funding. So thinking about how to use that funding can be really tricky. When we think about more of the way this is rolling out, you're going to see again that ESSERS is going to be the mainstay. You'll be able to work through your Title I formula grants as you have done for the last year. One thing that's really important is that $800 million will be set aside to focus on students who are experiencing homelessness within these K-12 grants. And what's also really attractive is that 10% state set aside is not going simply to administrative costs. The state is putting in additional supports around learning loss, summer enrichment programs, after school programs. And so there's very little going to administration. So in addition to thinking about your district strategy, you really want to keep a close eye on and help inform your state strategy. And again, we're seeing that 90% of the dollars are going to LEAs with broad flexibility. And these funds are able to be obligated through September 30th, 2024. The other thing to note about the American Rescue Plan is the additional money that is going to the most impacted non-public schools, and also to IDA, which has been historically underfunded, making sure that there's additional funding for our most vulnerable students. The other thing you should see here is the money that is going into early childhood. We anticipate that this funding used well will result in a significant reduction in childhood poverty. Now you might say, Barb, that sounds great, but I'm really worried about what happens after the stimulus. And rightly so. Any of us who's been involved in federal programs and school funding for a long time fear the funding cliff. It always feels just a little bit away. What I would say to you is this is an opportunity to use it or lose it. And given the needs that we're seeing in our schools, we don't want to lose this funding. There's opportunities here to think about shifting your adoption cycle for curriculum, to prepay subscriptions, or to invest in human capital, in your principals supervisors, your teachers, to make sure that they have the resources that they need. It's an opportunity to strengthen and reimagine your strategic plan, to make it more resilient, and to get the long-term structural changes that will help your schools be more equitable to reach the whole child and the whole community. I would encourage you as we move forward in this conversation to avoid what I think about as the pocket syndrome. A pocket here, a pocket there, a pocket, and pretty soon we don't really have a comprehensive program. What we want to do in the second part of this webinar is to really think together about what research is saying and how those insights could inform the investments you make, could help you think about a comprehensive plan that's going to really help realize your big vision. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Amelia, in just a second to do that. The final reminders for you are there's a cascade of obligation dates here. This is your bulletin board chart so that you can keep these things straight. And typically you've got to use one before the other. Remember that you have tremendous flexibility, not seen since the Reagan era with Chapter 5. You really have to think about this as a short-term increase in your per pupil funding. And our schools are protected with the maintenance of equality and effort protections so that these federal funds do not supplant local funding. And I think that's critically important for us to really get to where we want to be with equity. The other thing to remember is that, of course, with this funding, there are some requirements, like us putting together your school reopening plan. But I don't know a district out there who's not already doing that. And I think the key, as I turn it over to Amelia, is coherence and sustainability. Amelia?
Thank you so much, Barb. You really set us very nicely for this conversation. So as we go into the research and what should inform our decision making, I do want us to have this question in mind. What problem are we trying to solve in our context? And what types of schools will support the types of learning called for a better future? Stopping learning losses and gaining the types of learning for a better future. I think it is important for us to start by reminding ourselves that the normal has never been good enough. Like when we look at the NAEP, we typically look at the bottom scores, but I want to turn your attention to the fact that in the last 30 years, we have not even been able to change the percentage of students that read at advanced NAEP levels. Out of 56 million students in the US, only 9% overall read at advanced levels. If you look at the white subgroup, it's 12%, the Black population, 3%, the Latino population, 4%. So this truly is a historical moment where we have more knowledge, where when society and also economy are demanding of us a more challenging set of skills, and where there's a greater commitment to equitable educational outcomes. So like Barb said, ESSER gives districts an enormous amount of flexibility. What investments will you make to create a more equitable and empowering future for all kids? And what will start to transform what has not worked really great for a lot of kids? I recently read an article on PDK reminding us that we can approach this investment as yoga, long-term, working the core, or just short-term gains, like just going to the gym once in a while and lifting a little bit of weight. We have organized the research into 3 buckets to help you work your core. So first of all, I do want to talk about the science of reading, and a strong foundation is needed, certainly. But this has to include more than learning to read. Remember what I said, only 9% read at advanced levels. So as we talk about this ecosystem under the science of reading, we also need to get more kids to read more, and to get more kids to build their reading and writing muscles using more complex texts while building knowledge. So very quickly, before we talk about application, when it comes to instruction aligned to the science of reading, Scarborough's rope visually represents the complexity of becoming a skilled reader, with multiple strands that must come together in an increasing strategic and automatic way. We must remember that skilled reading is possible because of the dependencies between the types of knowledge. Learning about one affects what is learned about the others. An instruction based on how these integrated aspects come together has a very different feel than practices that treats everything separately. With that, I also want to call attention to Mark Seidenberg. In his book, Language at the Speed of Sight, one of the most important ideas that has come out of the recent research is the role of experience. Our brain seeks patterns, and students truly are statistical learners. What we learn about one word transfers to another word. So we must look for the right learning opportunities, including the right amount of explicit instruction, but also practice. So students are able to pick up on properties of words and transfer to other areas. But even if we have a strong foundation, we still need to have a formative assessment that prioritizes and illuminates students' growth and learning. Formative here is the key word. Without that, we're not going to be able to effectively differentiate and accelerate. Effective differentiation of instruction has been shown to be 4 to 10 times more effective than just whole group its counterpart. When it comes to meaning, code-based and meaning-based, Connor and colleagues have shown the impact of differentiation. But we are not talking here about differentiation as remediation of tracking. We are talking about acceleration. All of this together creates an ecosystem, providing students with these meaningful learning opportunities, receiving feedback, timely supports, and a clear sense of progress leading to mastery helps students develop a growth mindset. So when we think about translating this research into practice, there are two things that I want to point out before our colleagues can show us what this can look like. When we think about data, please don't treat all data the same. The research is very clear that if data does not deepen teachers' understanding of how students learn and helps teachers understand what is driving their misconceptions so they can shift, pivot the instruction, it has absolutely no impact on student learning. This is really a big deal because in this country, billions of dollars are spent on data that does not do this. Next, the next piece of applied research that is important for us to remember is that the science of reading has really pushed for intervention efforts to be based on understanding what skilled reading development looks like and what can disrupt this development. So in knowing that, when we differentiate in order to accelerate, it is clear that the only high impact interventions bring these three things together. The phoneme awareness, phonics, word study, all of that coming together for orthographic mapping. But without opportunities for practice, we will not see acceleration. So we know a lot. So what comes next?
Amelia, as you're talking, I keep being stuck on the concept of effective differentiation. And one of the things that I think we're seeing districts do for effective differentiation is to pair assessment and differentiation together in more effective ways. You know, data that tells us everything a child can't do isn't necessarily helpful. You know, just yes, this child couldn't answer the main idea and details question on this computer assessment. But is that because they don't understand main idea and details? Is that because they didn't understand the vocabulary in the text? Or is that because their decoding skills aren't up to actually reading the words yet? But if somebody read them the words, they'd actually be able to answer the main idea and details question. But if we don't know any of that, then that child is put into remediation on main idea and details, among all the other things. And one of the things that I think an assessment needs to match the idea in the science of reading that I think is so powerful, which is that there is a developmental trajectory. One does learn certain things before other things. It's really hard to learn letter sounds if you don't yet have the concept of words, and that words are even made up of, you can't understand that words are made up of letters if you don't understand their words. We're not ready to think about what sound that vowel makes in that word if we haven't figured out that vowels make different sounds in different words, and there's rhyming and onset and rhyme. Things have to build on each other. And what we see too often, I think, is programs that expect we're just going to teach all of the effective science of reading information to every child. Well,
No matter what they need.
no matter what they do and don't need. And, you know, I think one of the reasons effective differentiation is so effective is because it doesn't waste children's time or teachers' time. And that the right assessment tells you not just what a child doesn't know, but what does the child know already, and what of all the things they don't yet know is the next step. I was talking to a principal, well, he's the head of curriculum now for his district, but he was talking about being a principal last year, and they implemented a new assessment, the ERLA, and that within a month, the first thing he noticed is that the conversations in IEP meetings and parent-teacher conferences transformed because teachers began talking about what students knew and what they were working on mastering next. That is what the right assessment does for you.
Yeah.
Well, okay, fine. Then there's a transition to that slide, because I think the other thing about that is that, yes, there are a specific trajectory. And I got my master's in reading. There's a lot of deep expertise. You know way more about this than I do. But most of the individual things that children need to learn in the path from I don't yet know how to figure out this word to I can read any word on a page are things that anybody can teach them if they know which things to teach. I have very effectively used second, third, and fourth graders to teach other kindergarten through second graders how to read if you tell them which thing to teach when.
So it's not a secret.
It's not a secret. So
Oh,
why can't children and parents know exactly where a child is and what they need next so they can teach it to them? And that is the power of the pandemic, is that lots of horribleness, but one amazing thing is that we have more access sometimes to many of the other people in a home, and we can engage parents or older siblings or other caretakers as partners in a really powerful sharing power and information way.
absolutely.
I think that's so incredible, because there's two things I think a lot about right now. One, I'm hearing agency and empowering people who perhaps haven't been before. But the other thing I think about as a former reading specialist and Title I coordinator is I'm doing the math. How many students need acceleration? How are we going to do this as a system without shortcutting building knowledge and all of the other things? And what I heard here is that a good assessment is efficient. It is the straightest line between 2 points, what a child knows and what they need to know next. And we're not spending time fumbling around with lots of other things. It's this beautiful efficiency, but also relationship between the child and the teacher.
And Barb, it's cohesive, for everyone regarding parents of several children. The teachers are using the same tool. It's equitable because if I'm a new teacher to this, I now have the tool that's going to support me in my work with the students. So it's powerful.
Yes, Gloria, it's bias busting, because the secret is out. And I think that as a school psychologist, so often I was called into meetings to translate data. What good is that? It has to be transparent. If we're going to assess students, we should not hold back what that information holds for their growth.
The other thing about this also, it's agency for the student. They are involved in their own growth in reading. They get power goals. They know what to do next, where they're going. There's a light in the tunnel, specifically around our secondary kids who are reading way below grade level.
Yes, absolutely.
That's amazing. And what I hear here too, Amelia, is that you're doing this. It could be done in person or digitally. We're not bringing students who are at home to school to administer an assessment. This is part of an ongoing, natural, formative process. Well, gosh, I mean, that just blew my mind, Amelia. And that was point number one of what you're thinking about and what you're wanting districts to think about in terms of focus areas with this funding opportunity. I have a feeling, because I'm in charge of the slide deck, that you have more.
Yes, let's continue to work our core. So I do think it's really important, though, that beyond supporting the foundation, a strong foundation, we must be able to support the whole child, especially coming back from the year that we have come back. So we cannot talk about science of reading without talking about the science of learning and development. Because the science of learning and development has truly emerged the findings of what works to support the kinds of relationships and learning opportunities needed to promote children's well-being, healthy development, and deep and transferable learning is as evident as the science of reading, and not many people are talking about it. So moving forward, we cannot leave the science of learning and development behind. And in talking about this, I do want to highlight how the science of learning has brought together key findings. One of them is why we have to engage in this, and it's about deep learning. Shallow learning is not going to do it, and it does not engage the kids. But deep learning, especially through problem-based learning, or project-based learning, strengthens the engagement, improves learning and retention of information, boosts achievement scores across subject matters, not just reading, but also reach students from all types of backgrounds. There are 4 recent studies that just came out that are irrefutable in terms of the impact of deep learning for well-being. But even if we have that, we have to take a look at new pedagogies and culturally relevant practices. So if you have the right what through deep learning and project-based learning, we still need to look at the design of the instruction. So in terms of new pedagogies, information transmission will not do. Just pay attention to the kids that are just tuning out and not even coming on camera. Inquiry through cognitive apprenticeship truly is more of a theory, a pedagogy of liberation. This approach not only features like well-sequenced instruction that truly supports transformed understanding through application, but also provides the right amount of challenge and scaffolded supports. So every kid is a part of the thinking curriculum, even if their skills are not quite at grade level. In order to do that, well-being and culturally relevant practices are embedded into this new pedagogy, right? Children and youth, they learn best when they feel safe, where their identity is validated, where they feel a sense of purpose and belonging, and they find that the information is relevant and it's engaging. They have a chance of being in a community of learners. It's not the teacher in the front of the room delivering and they are passive recipients. For all of that to come together, you do need the right what. And this is where high quality curriculum is so critical. Knowledge building is at the very core of equity. And I am not talking about just knowing more words. Knowledge building impacts equity because it impacts how we learn, how we transfer information, how we put new information into long-term memory. So if we don't create this other ecosystem, there's no way that we're going to be able to educate for life and work. And in the follow-up that we are going to send, Barb, we are going to put a link to this report. But in this second part, deploying a knowledge-rich ELA curriculum that includes a structured systematic foundational skills, but also PBL. So there's inquiry and personalization. There are texts and approaches to better reflect and include culture, backgrounds, ethnicities, but also end of unit projects that are meaningful, that helps kids build this portfolio of being an active member of society. So for maximum impact, we need to think about the science of learning and development.
Amelia, I hear you talking about that. I'm thinking about, these 2 choices, not that it's always this stark, but these 2 choices that we could spend this money on remediation,
Yeah.
try and catch kids up. Or we could spend this money on how do we make a different way of teaching and learning that works better for all students, when only 9% of students who had been advanced for the last multiple decades, what we were doing wasn't getting us the result. The reason we all went into education, it's not getting us the results we went into education to get. So, but we can use this money to do that and catch kids up at the same time.
Absolutely. Having this high quality curriculum that incorporates PBL, that contains relevant topics where kids see themselves, it's just a change maker.
So I'm going to say it a lot more simpler. If we do what we always do, we get what we always get. And
That's right, Gloria.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, we're not here to fix kids, teachers, or families. We're here to fix a system. And we really have to reimagine what that system should look like based on what has worked this past year and what hasn't worked, and really tear it apart and reimagine.
Gloria, you're making me think, wait, Gloria, you're making me think, okay, so I'm one of the authors of our core, which is our core curriculum. And okay, I'm going to get a little passionate about that for a second. But when you talk about systems, how can we blame teachers or students or families when we know that 40% of our kids aren't reading on grade level, and yet we keep giving schools curricula that assume everybody's on grade level?
Yeah.
Or take everybody who's not on grade level out of core instruction because they can't figure out how to make it work, and give them remediation that doesn't catch them up. I think one of the things that I think is most important about rethinking curriculum is that it has to be designed assuming every single child is brilliant, because they are, and every teacher is dedicated to getting that brilliance to blossom, but that we aren't making a system in which that's possible.
Yes. The design is the magic here. Mm-hmm. You design for inequity or you design for equity. That's it.
And that's why I'm so excited about this funding. It's the opportunity, if we seize it, not to piecemeal things, but to really look at our strategic plans and reimagine them in a totally different way with the funding to do it. It's an incredible opportunity to roll up our sleeves, involve our community, our stakeholders, and do something really special.
Yeah.
And of course, we're thinking about summer school and after school and all those things, but there's a through line, isn't there? It's seamless.
Absolutely is.
And Barb, you said something earlier too that I think that our districts and schools discovered, and even our company discovered, about developing coalitions, both internally and externally, of really looking at, if we're talking about a summer school program or an after school program, who could be our partners? One of them specifically are our families, because we've seen what parents have contributed over this past year, and also the challenges. So the big takeaway for me is that this diverse group that makes up this coalition, in districts and unusual partners. And I think that's how we have to look at it, through that lens.
Gloria, I think that's so true. And I think in the rush to do something, we could do the wrong thing. And shortcutting stakeholder involvement is not the place you want to be. And the way that the funds are rolling out, we have this opportunity over a period of years that if you have the right design, you make the right moves, kids are going to catch up, and they're going to catch up much more quickly than if you do something fragmented. And the teachers that are quitting the profession in droves are going to stay and be more fulfilled, because they're going to have the resources they need, and they're not going to feel like they're isolated. We've seen what's happened sometimes when this kind of the guidance that's coming out is misapplied. I worked in Reading First as a technical assistant, and the idea of dedicated time for language arts was wonderful. But what happened with the 90-minute reading block was some students didn't get it. And before you knew it, it was chopped up and there was no content. And so, we're at this delicate place, and Amelia, is the best encourager and envisioner in this of, please think big, please think systemic, because we don't want to have that downside to this funding.
We can accelerate reading and life outcomes. We cannot think about accelerating reading without accelerating life outcomes. And a knowledge building curriculum that includes problem-based learning helps kids to do that. It's a change maker. But of course, Barb, and this is easy because this has always been true, but there is new data now that really looks at the impact of supporting the whole system, not only maximizing adult learning, but also building organizational capacity. So very briefly, what we want to point out is the research related to collective capacity, building the social capacity in a professional capacity in a building depends on providing high quality professional development that is embedded and connected to the curriculum and the pedagogy. So if it's not connected, you're not going to see an impact, but not leaving the principles behind. Principles now, the latest Wallace report that came out shows that principles have a much larger impact than was previously thought. So we have to invest in them and using a continuous improvement lens. So again, the Carnegie Foundation using the principles of improvement science really have shown the way of how do we work through our complex systems to scale greatness, right? And I do here, though, want to talk about, in looking at the systems and supporting the optimization of the system, that when we look at the multi-tier system of supports, which is a system that has so much promise, but it's also a system where you can be 100% compliant and 0% effective. Mm-hmm. And this is really a scary thought, right? So starting now, let's not pretend that we're going to be surprised when kids come back. Kids will need a lot of help. So let's prepare to respond for who's coming. Let's start looking at our multi-tier systems of support to truly support kids and adults. And we don't have to wait for the first benchmark assessment. Mm-hmm. We know how we need to set up the system to respond. And that's probably a wrap to think about our yoga in working our core.
Amelia, there's one thing I'm the Midwest Regional Vice President, yeah. And so we have a large dual language systems in our schools and also multilingual learners. What pearls of wisdom would you remind administrators in terms of making decisions in the upcoming year?
I think the most important right now is we can't forget that families, kids, our teachers, principals, everybody has gone through a lot. But that does not necessarily translate into all deficits. We are talking about sometimes the most resilient but underserved populations. So let's continue to look through an asset-based perspective. Let's look at what they bring in and how we can capitalize on the strengths that they bring in. But you cannot approach things as a one-size-fits-all, right? If you don't leave room for cross-linguistic connections, for multiple entry points, you're going to be denying access.
That's exactly what our dual language schools are asking for, those cross-linguistic sessions. Absolutely.
Yes.
I would add to that that literacy skills transfer across languages, knowledge transfers across languages, that if any child who learned more reading and writing and background in the language of their family this year is ahead of children who didn't, regardless of, even if they didn't spend a single minute speaking English.
That's right.
I think this really, yeah. I think what we're really talking about here is the literacy operating system.
Yeah, we need to take a look at the system and take a look at the core. We must go for yoga long term. Yoga is good for us when we're 70, when we're 60, when we're 50. So we must look at the very core of our systems to start creating a different future. And I think that, as you can see, the way we organized our research really brings the best of the science of reading, the science of learning, of development, and the science of improvement. But at the core of everything, whether you're talking about teachers, principals, kids from multiple zip codes, we do believe that the brain and the development of intelligences and capacities are malleable. And we do believe that the way we set up our system contributes to the growth or stagnation of that development. So it is on us what the investments that we make that will determine the impact that we get.
I feel like that's almost a mic drop right there, Amelia. And again, if you're an administrator here and you're thinking about how am I putting this all together, what we've tried to do is make sure that you're clear on the allowable uses for funding, but then tag that to the bigger ideas found in the research to really think about and to hopefully inspire you. Many times those funding webinars are pretty dry. It's just the numbers, just the facts, but we're hoping that you are receiving the factual information you need, but then feel like you're part of a planning session where you can begin to just be inspired and go back and think bigger.
Yeah.
So that the next time there's a pandemic, we're already into a new norm. Hopefully, no, knock on wood, where we have digital capacity, we have expanded learning time, we have cross-linguistic connections in a rich core and system that also is providing social and emotional and academic supports that we do have what we've envisioned.
Yeah, Barb, like I think we're not saying that this is easy or simple, but what we're saying is that we can be better, we can do better, and what you decide to do matters now than ever, more than ever. And the simple solutions, or the a little bit of this and a little bit of that, will not create different results. We are telling you, it will not. And I think down deep inside, that. So this is really about starting to create a system that makes it impossible for kids to fail. It's about fixing the system, not the kids. We
In
can't.
any conditions,
Yes.
right? I mean, I was thinking about
Don't settle.
as the pandemic began and as schools closed, watching on Twitter, teachers posting about students moving up ERLA reading levels
Yes.
over Zoom.
And
right, and students who were not every student, of course, students not showing up, etc., but where learning didn't stop. And it makes me think, as you said, Barb, not just to worry about closing the gaps from this interruption to schooling, but how to interruption proof our systems so that children can learn regardless of the conditions of this year, next year, or the future. I was just hearing about a school where the school has averaged 1.3 years of growth so far this year for students K-5, and it's only March in a
Wow.
pandemic.
Wow.
You know, well, and it's not a particularly economically advantaged school or community. So we can do this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We absolutely can. It truly is the never settle. And again, I think this is what is so exciting about this opportunity right now is we have big ideas and big dreams, is sometimes past structures get in our way, past habits, past expectations. This is a chance to really reinvent. Amelia, I'm wondering if you want to just articulate our vision of a literacy operating system as a big vision for what this could look like as we're coming towards the end of our hour.
Sure. Just very quickly here, we really truly have thought through all the findings, how the research has merged across fields in looking at the science of reading, from providing a strong foundation all the way to using the right types of assessment to be able to differentiate and accelerate and provide everybody involved, including the kid, a path forward towards mastery, which that impacts their ability to become expert readers for their own reasons, right? We can't hold the kid back. And within that, then taking it to the next level of truly creating the type of solution that alters life's outcomes. So we're talking about deep learning, new pedagogies, kids as partners with each other, and also with the teacher in finding solutions for real life problems, but also learning how to learn, debate, research, analyze, synthesize, present to real life audiences. So it's learning for the real world. And this is the piece where we cannot leave the adults behind. So even if you get the right solutions, but the right systems and supports are not in place, we tend to go back to the way we have always done things. And I think that this disruption and this assistance really challenges to look at us, challenges to look at this moment for maximum impact, not for what works, but for what works best for this moment, for this time. So we can achieve, I think, what it says, literacy and justice for all.
Just like to say thank you to my colleagues for joining in this conversation today. I'm double checking to make sure we don't have any questions. It looks like folks are really looking for resources and looking for conversation rather than a simple Q&A from the chat. And I want to just say to you, we are here for you. We will be sending out resources tomorrow following this webinar, and also the ability just to get in touch with local support in your region, because I think there's a big planning process here to make the most of this funding.
What a way to close, huh? I think this quote says it all.
And we so appreciate, I mean, you could spend an hour anywhere here right now, and you have buildings to be cleaned, students to feed, plans to make. Thank you for spending this time with us.